Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ray. Today I'm going to walk you through how to write a strong introductory paragraph. And while this lecture is geared toward literary analysis and essays that focus on breaking down works of literature, this is an approach I use in my professional writing and in my other composition courses. This will see you through in other courses in either professional and also professional settings where you have to write cover letters, memos, things like that. So let's get started. So, firstly, why is your introduction so important? It's your first impression, right? And I'm sure all of us have met someone that we grew to love them or appreciate them, but they made a really bad first impression. It was hard to get past that. Same thing with the paper. You could write me the strongest, examination of Story of an Hour I've ever read, but if the first paragraph is a hot mess, it's very hard for your reader to get past that. Um, it also has the job of introducing your topic, right? It needs to be very clear to your reader what you're examining and what your argument's going to be, right? What are you trying to prove about that topic? Thesis statements, I'm sure you've come across in the past, but I wanted to go over this again. A thesis statement is usually for this length of paper, about a sentence long, occasionally two sentences, and it focuses your main point. It establishes the topic of your paper and your position. So even if you think back to a comp class, if you're writing about something, like I always tell my Comp 1 students, they cannot write about the legalization of marijuana because I've read that paper so many times and, I'm not even taking a stance. I just don't want to read it anymore. But if that's your topic, your thesis statement would say something like, the legalization of marijuana would be positive for the economy. You've made it very clear to your reader, your topic, what your side is, what you aim to prove. Your thesis guides you through your writing assignment, keeps it focused. The best piece of advice I got as a writer was I had to do my dissertation, which was a book for my degree, and someone told me, you know what? Write your thesis in a Post-it, put it like what you're trying to prove, put it in the corner of your laptop screen, and if you write anything that doesn't have anything to do with that Post-it, you delete it. A thesis statement works in the same way. Everything in your paper needs to be about proving that thesis statement. You want to make sure it's debatable and defendable. So you couldn't have a thesis like Story of an Hour was written in the 1890s. Well, that's a fact, right? Or Story of an Hour focuses on women. Again, not very debatable. Debatable is someone could stand up and say, I totally disagree with you, right? So you want a thesis statement that's defendable and debatable. That's what makes for solid writing. You want to be clear and specific as possible. I think somewhere all of us have been in a course or a position where we've been rewarded for writing fluff, I call it, right? Extra words, $5 words, dragging it out. I don't advocate for that kind of writing ever, but especially not in your thesis. I always say the tighter, the better, the more powerful. And avoid sentence structures that begin like the point of my paper is, or in this essay we will examine. Just, go for what you're trying to say. Story of an Hour forces readers to consider the position of married women, right? Something like that. You want it short, sweet, direct. Developing your thesis. Okay, you want to mention the name of the piece you're looking at. I mean, if you've already mentioned it, you could say something like Chopin's short story. And again, you have other options of what you're writing about, and just using that as an example right now. You want to clearly lay out what you think the author is trying to prove. And again, this is for our paper, not general thesis statements. If you're writing a paper for biology, it might have a thesis, but it's not going to be about a short story, of course. But you want your thesis for this assignment to clearly state what your stance is on the story or the poem. What do you think the author is aiming to achieve through the story? So here's a sample thesis statement. Through her 1894 short story, Story of an Hour, Kate Chopin challenges contemporary readers to see how women were trapped in marriage. So contemporary, fancy meaning for people of the same era as she was in. So someone's saying that the whole point of the story is just to force her readers to realize that marriage was suffocating to women. And I tend to read the story that way, but it's certainly debatable. Someone could disagree with me. This, again, we're going back to stuff that applies to this paper and really any paper you're going to write in the future. I would say this is true for, cover letters, memos, things like that as well. How do you construct an introductory paragraph? I'm a visual learner. I like the three-tiered cake. Your hook, right? It's The first sentence of any paragraph is your topic sentence. That's true of body paragraphs, which we'll get into later. But when it's the first sentence in your whole paper, we call it the hook. And it's called that because it's meant to grab your reader's attention. And there's lots of ways to do this. It could be a rhetorical question. Please avoid, though, introductions that have like 20 rhetorical questions back to back. We're talking one. A quote can be a great way to set the topic. A definition. This is less common with literary analysis. This is more common with like a scientific paper. A surprising fact, something like, did you know a woman's property automatically went to her husband, or something like that. Background information. This depends on what your thesis is and what you think the reader needs to know in order to appreciate and understand your paper. And so in this paper, you might be looking at the author or the work you're examining, giving some information on that, the topic you're exploring, insights into the topic. So don't assume that everyone, if again, going back to Story of an Hour, knows what it was like for a wife in 1894. So maybe you want to give some context, some background information so they can appreciate your take on the story. It could be about the author herself, like whatever you think the reader needs to know to understand what you're trying to prove. And then 9 times out of 10 in a paper like this, the thesis will be the last sentence in the first paragraph. There are other approaches you can build to your thesis. It could be in your conclusion. You can have what's called an implied thesis, where it's just very obvious to the reader what you're trying to prove. But in such a short assignment, I really recommend you stick to the approach of your thesis is the last sentence in your first paragraph. And again, a thesis is great. It establishes your argument. It's that roadmap for your paper, and it keeps you centered and on point. And so here is a sample introduction from a former student, and they were writing about Langston Hughes's poem, Let America Be America Again. So let's take a look at this together. Like a bedtime story a child is told again and again, Americans grow up hearing that the U.S. is a land of freedom and equality. While America is often painted as an opportunity-filled utopia, the American dream is not readily available for everyone. Langston Hughes is one such person for whom this dream could never be fully realized. Being a black man in the early 1900s, Hughes faced constant discrimination and was denied the freedoms others took for granted. Also, as a political activist and keen observer, he recognized the plight of other oppressed groups at the time, such as Native Americans, European immigrants, and the impoverished. Hughes' poem America, and it should be Hughes' poem Let America Be America Again, confronted 20th century readers with the unjust social divisions that denied the American dream to many of its citizens. Okay, what's strong about it? I think the hook's interesting, right? Like a bedtime story, a child's told again and again, Americans grow up hearing. So right away, they're drawing attention to this idea that America, is the land of the free, that America is the land of opportunity, and questioning that. So he's got our attention. Great background information in that he's both sharing that America wasn't like that for everyone in the early 1900s. He's introduced the author and why the author has insight into this topic. And then the thesis itself is very clear cut. He's saying the poem, confronted readers of that time by saying the dream is not happening. There's all these unjust divisions in the country. So it's a tight paragraph. There's a couple typos, like an A that should be an an, and he should have wrote the poem's called Let America Be America Again, not just America. But overall, very well written. So I hope you get a good sense from this short video of how to write an introduction. There's, of course, lots of resources online. But this is the approach that I use in my own writing. And, of course, contact me with any questions on this topic.